All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. My name is Sean. I am the product manager for our Nebula Cloud Management Platform. So last week we did our sort of introduction to Nebula for those of you that wanted to learn a little bit more about Nebula itself. And today we're going through some best practices, some tips and tricks once you get into Nebula and start using it to manage some of your customers. As we go through today, please send in any questions using the question and answer part of the Nebula interface. I will be able to see those, and depending on the question, I may choose to answer it then, or I may hold off till the end of the webinar to answer the question later. But do send those in as you think of those questions, and we will address them as we go through. So the first thing I want to start with, this is going to be one of the first things that happens when you try to set up a new customer in Nebula, is it will prompt you to create an organization and a site. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this. So organizations are generally going to be your customers. So if you're an MSP or a VAR out there setting up customer networks, you would generally want each of your customers to be their own organization. And then underneath the organizations, you may have lots of different sites. So if you have, a franchisee who owns a bunch of Subway locations, you would probably set up him under one organization, and then each of those different Subways would be set up as their own site. Now, it may be that you need to split them up more or less than that, but in general, the main takeaway here is do not put multiple customers into the same organization and manage each customer as a site. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is coming on here on this next slide. And the reason for this, one of the main reasons for this, has to do with licensing. So if you have customers that you want to use Plus or Pro Pack to unlock additional features for, in order to be able to set that up, each device under that organization must have a Pro or Plus Pack license. So if you have multiple customers under the same organization, you end up in a situation where for some reason you need to upgrade one of those customers to Pro Pack. You will need to buy Pro Pack licenses not only for every device that customer has, but also every device that the other customers that are also under that organization have. So basically the org itself gets converted to Plus or Pro Pack, not on a site basis. So organizations also can have only one owner. So that's something to keep in mind when it comes to transferring things and setting them up. Organizations can have an unlimited number of sites underneath them. So our suggestion again is have at least one organization per customer. Now you may want to have multiple organizations per customer. A common situation that we run into a lot here is you have a customer, they have retail locations, they have a warehouse, they have admin offices, and maybe, for instance, you need Pro Pack for those retail sites, but you don't need Pro Pack for the admin office, or the warehouse. So what you may want to do is split that customer up, put his retail organization or retail sites under one organization, and put all the other sites under a different organization. So that way you only need to buy Pro Pack licenses for those sites that need Pro Pack. You may also want to split them up for other reasons, just to make it easier for you to manage them, based on state or region or some other characteristic that some of the sites have that others do not have. So we'll start talking now here about admins and owners. That's another area where we see some confusion out there. So every organization, as I mentioned before, has a owner, a single owner, and there are certain functions and features that only that owner can do. Underneath, in addition to that owner, you also do have the ability to set up admin accounts. So admin accounts may have access to many of the same features as the owner, but they will not have access to all of them. So the owner account is going to be by default whoever creates the organization. So one of the problems we get calls about at tech support all the time is, you have a admin and you let your admin create those organizations, your admin leaves, and now you no longer have ownership of those sites because you no longer have access to that account that your admin was using. So generally, you're going to want somebody at your company who is going to be the owner for all of your accounts. Ideally, probably somebody that actually is an owner of your business, or at least somebody that you know is going to be around for a while. So one of the things you can do is you can set up at any point as many organizations as you want. So you can set up a bunch of blank organizations and then allow your admins to basically grab one of those blank orgs and start configuring it later when you have a customer that needs to be set up. So that way, you're not constantly having your admins bug your owner to create new organizations for them. You can transfer ownership between organizations. And only an owner can transfer licenses from one organization to another organization. So when it comes to administrator types, in addition to the owner, you have full. So somebody who has full access as an administrator has access to basically all of the settings for every site under that organization. So if you have multiple customers, you may assign, certain admins to have access only to certain customers. So you can make configuration changes, and you can delegate most of the ownership ability to admin accounts. But admins, even if they've been delegated ownership authority, they cannot delete organizations. They cannot delegate owner authority to other administrators. They cannot transfer ownership of different organizations. But otherwise, they have access to the same features that the owner does. So that's just a checkbox when you're setting up a new admin, that whether or not you want to delegate ownership authority to them as well. We also have a setting called read only. So read only, as it sounds, means that when that admin logs in for that organization, they can see all of the sites, they can see the settings, they can see the logs, but they don't have the ability to modify anything. And this is the level you're going to choose if you have admins that you want to have access only to certain sites under an organization. At the organization level, you will set them to read only, and then you will go into the site settings and grant them access on a site-by-site basis. And this is the same thing here, organization, setting their level to none, gives them access to nothing, no sites under that organization until you manually go in and give them access on a site-by-site basis. So now going through here, when you go to the site, so you've set up your new admin, and you've set them either to read only or as none in the organization settings. You're then going to be prompted to give them access on a site basis. So you will have basically to go through each site that an organization has, and then be able to control on a site basis what access they have. So obviously the most common one is going to be full access to the site. So that gives them the ability to configure the settings for all of the devices, view the logs, etc. Read only will allow them to view the settings and view the logs, but not make any changes. So monitor settings just basically give them access to the logs to be able to see the items that are underneath the monitor settings in the Nebula interface. They cannot see the configurations, they cannot modify configurations. And we also have an installer type. So this is going to be very common, especially for those of you that use third parties to go on site to do the hardware installation. Those third parties, you would grant them installer access. And that gives them the ability to see the dashboard, to see what's going on, and it gives them the ability to add devices to the site. And they will be able to set up the locations of those devices, take photos of the devices, but they will not be able to make any configuration changes. They will also have the ability to remove devices. And then lastly, we have what's called guest ambassador. So this is normally an admin level that is given to an employee of your customer. If you're providing hotspot access, whether that means it's a coffee shop or hotel, or whether that means, it's a commercial building and you want to give out temporary access to a public hotspot for internet access to visitors. And that gives them access to the voucher section or the account section to add and remove guest accounts for the guest Wi-Fi network and nothing else. So that's it as far as the different levels of setting go. So we'll walk through here quickly how you set up admin access. So you go into the admin section here and you click create administrator. And as you see here, we have the ability to type in the person's name, type in their email address, and it does need to be a valid email address. And then as you can see there, we have organization access. So again, if it's full, they have access to all sites and all settings. If you want to restrict that, you would choose either read only or none, and then it will pop up the ability here to set it as a site basis. So you'll see here, if you select none, organization access to none, it automatically adds a new part to the interface there, which has an ability for you to set it on a site basis. So you've got a drop-down menu that lists all of the sites under that organization, and then you go in and choose what access level you want for each site. So as I mentioned before, ownerships can be transferred. So if for some reason, some of your admins have set up their own organizations and you want to transfer them over to you, or maybe you're, selling the company and somebody else is taking over. So we can transfer ownership in the Nebula web interface. So in order to do this, the owner obviously needs to be in there, but the person you are transferring ownership to does need to be set up as an admin for that organization. So if they aren't already an admin, the first step is adding them as an admin. So you go to organization-wise, configure administrators. So if we haven't set someone up, we'll go ahead and add them in as an administrator for the new owner. And then you will get a list of your admins there. So all you're going to do is you are going to click the change owner button over there on the top right of the screen. And then you will select, it'll prompt you to select who the new owner is going to be. And there is a checkbox just making sure that you're sure that you are giving up your ownership rights. Click yes. And that's basically all you have to do to transfer ownership. Now, last time we did this webinar, we had some questions about transferring devices and licenses, and it's a very similar process. So we'll go through it here really quick. So you're going to start by going to organization-wide, licenses and inventory, and then selecting the devices tab, which will give you a list of all of the devices in that organization. So you're going to go through and you're going to check the boxes of any devices you want to transfer. You're going to then go to the actions menu. And you can then change the site assignment, or in this example here, we're changing the organization. The process is basically the same. So we'll click change organization. It'll take us to this screen here, and you simply have a drop-down menu with a list of all of the organizations you have access to. So you just select which organization you'd like to transfer the devices to. And then you have a checkbox here checking to see if you want to keep the interface settings. So the Ethernet LAN port settings the same when you do the transfer, or if you just want it to default to basics. And then you click finish. And that's all there is to it. And it's the same thing with licenses. You go into the same area here, organization-wide, licenses and inventory, only this time you're using the licenses tab instead of the devices tab, and you'll get a list of all of the licenses that are available. Choose the license that you're going to want to transfer, go up to actions, click transfer license. There we go. It will take you to a new license transfer screen. So again, you're going to need to choose the licenses you want to transfer. Select the target device that you're going to transfer them to. It will prompt you to select an organization and a device in that organization. You click OK and click Finish, and it will go ahead and transfer the license over. Now, a key thing here which causes some confusion for people is bundled licenses cannot be transferred. Again, if you have questions, send them in using question and answer. I cannot hear you. If we even open it up for you to talk, I can't hear you. So send it in, type it in question and answer, and I'll try to answer that for you. So bundled licenses cannot be transferred. So if you buy a Zycel Pro product, the Nebula Flex Pro, it will come with a bundled 1-year license. That license has to stay with the hardware. You aren't going to be able to transfer the license from that device to another device or to another organization. Instead, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to just transfer that device itself to whatever other site or org you want to use it on, and the license will automatically come along for the ride. But any licenses that you add, that you have purchased and added into your Nebula organization, any of those can be transferred from devices between sites and between organizations. And again, an owner has to be the one to transfer licenses between organizations. Now, another area where we have a lot of questions that we run into here comes up with this here, hardware locking. So by default in Nebula, we assume that if you have access to the device, to that QR code that's printed on the device, or to the box with the QR code on it, that you are, we'll call it an owner. You are the owner of the device. You have physical access to the device, therefore it is yours. So when you have a device and you want to transfer it from, say, one site to another site where you are physically moving the device from one to another, you simply grab the hardware, move it to the new site physically, scan the QR code, assign it to that new site or new organization, and it's ready to go. Now, the downside of that is if somebody who shouldn't have access to that QR code gets a hand of it, gets their hands on it, they can scan that QR code and take possession of the device in the Nebula interface. So the reason we set it up like this is we have a lot of larger MSPs where it's very common for hardware to be moved from site to site or org to org. Basically, a customer calls in with issues. Hey, I've got a problem. One of the first things they do is they swap out the hardware. If they decide to determine after swapping out the hardware wasn't the problem, they'll continue to troubleshoot it. But now the hardware that was on that customer's site is now, back at the main location. So they want to easily be able to then do the swap at another location when someone else has issues. It was something that we got a lot of requests for. And now that we've implemented it, we do have people that run into periodically, not very often, but it does happen where, usually your customer ends up scanning the QR code and taking possession of it. So the way to solve that is we have the ability to disable this function. It's done on a per organization basis. So you simply go to organization-wide settings, and under there is device ownership takeover. There's a checkbox. You click that checkbox and it disables the ability to transfer hardware by using the QR code. So another thing that we've gotten feedback here on is this guy here, alert aggregation. So one of the more annoying things that can happen in Nebula is if you have a large customer with a lot of devices and for some reason they go offline, maybe there's a power outage, maybe somebody cuts the fiber to the building, your phone or your email would suddenly get inundated with alerts for every single device at that site that's now gone offline. So we have the ability to set up aggregations. So instead of getting, a million push alerts, you will just get one push alert letting you know that a large number of devices have gone offline. So to set that up, you go to site-wide configure and alert settings. So you will need to do this on a site-by-site basis. It's just there under alert aggregation. Check that box to on, and now instead what happens is basically any alerts that should be sent out will be combined together over a 5-minute period and sent out as a single notification instead of individual notifications. So this is just showing how before you would get these alerts showing, access point is offline, switch is offline over and over again. Now you'll just, if you've enabled alert aggregation, you'll just get one push message saying X number of devices have gone offline at this particular site. Another area where there's been some confusion here has to do with DHCP binding or using static IP addresses. There's two different ways to do it, each with their own sort of pros and cons. So I want to explain the two different ways of doing it. The first one is using the client page and having the ability to reserve IP policy. So if you go under your list of clients for your site, it will produce a list of all devices, wired and wireless, that are on that site. And it'll show you things like, their MAC address, their IP address, etc. So what you can do is you can check any clients that are there or any devices that are online, go to policy and choose reserve IP. And from that point forward, every time they do DHCP, they will get that IP address that they had at the time that you enabled the reserve IP function. The other way we have to do it is going into your firewall or security appliance interface page and using a static DHCP table. So basically that allows you to manually go in, type in the IP address you want a device to have, put in the MAC address of the device, and put in a description for that device, and you can set that up so whenever that device is connected, it will get the IP address that's been assigned to it. So sort of the trade-offs here are the client page is the easiest way to do this, right? You simply get a list of everything that's online, select them, choose reserve IP. The downside to this is it doesn't work if a device has not yet gone online, and it doesn't allow you to set what IP address you want it to use. It simply locks in the IP address that's already been assigned. So if you want to provide static DHCP IP addresses to devices that haven't yet been online, you will need to do it here through the static DHCP table page. Or if you want to specify specific IP addresses for specific devices, this is the page where you have to do it. The downside is you'll have to manually type in both the IP address and the MAC address of the device that you want to use it. So two different ways of doing it, two different places where you go to set those settings. So when you set something up over here, it does not also show up over here. The interface page, stuff that's been set up manually here, will override anything over here, generally, I believe. So when it comes to cloud management, for the most part, you just plug things in, and with Nebula, it works. But if you're on a site where they've really locked down the WAN access through the gateway, you may run into issues reaching the Nebula cloud servers for doing, downloading configurations, uploading logs, things like that. So this is a list of all the ports that need to be open in order for Nebula to work. So basically the ability for LAN devices to reach out to the WAN for things to work. I don't believe these have to be opened inbound. It's just purely outbound traffic needs to be allowed through your WAN. So TCP 6667 and 4335, that is for NetConf, which is the industry standard protocol we use for communication between our devices and the cloud servers. TCP 443, that's being used for firmware updates, access to our cloud authentication server, access to the web portal. So NTP UDP 123 needs to be so that our devices can reach out to a time server to sync their time in order to make the encryption on these features here work properly. And then UDP 4500 and UDP 500 if you're using VPN functionality. So we'll start talking about some of the features here on the access points that cause some confusion or cause issues for some of our partners when they're deploying. So a key thing here is power output setting in the interface is max power. And it will just be a generic list of power options here. You can see here, I think all of them default to 30 as the default for the max power. But actual power output used by the device will depend on what power output that device handles, right? Like a little NWA50AX does not have the same power output as a WBE660S. And then also on 5 and 6 gigahertz radios, depending on the channel being used, there are different limitations for the maximum output power. So, channel 35 is going to have different output power than one of the higher end channels in 5 gigahertz, for instance. And it's the same thing in 6. So that's something to keep in mind too. If you're not getting the power output that you want in 5 gigahertz, you may try manually changing the channel to different channels to see if you can find one that boosts up the power more. And then when it comes to 6E products, there was a chipset driver issue. I do not know if the chipset vendor ever corrected it. That caused it to report the wrong output power in the Nebula interface. So that was just the 6E products. The NWA 220AX-6E, the WAX 610D-6E, and the WAX 640S-6E. When it comes to multiple SSIDs, it's really important to remember that the reason you're using multiple SSIDs is to create multiple wireless networks that then bridge to different wired networks. So each SSID should be on its own VLAN to be able to create that isolation. And the best way to do that, obviously, is to use VLAN-aware switches on the network and a VLAN-aware security gateway. So that way the VLAN tag is enforced all the way from the wireless access point through to the gateway to make sure nothing leaks over or bleeds over. So to get to that, you go to configure access point and then enable the SSID advanced mode. And that'll give you the ability to go in and set up the VLAN IDs for each SSID. We do also have some ways to provide some additional security for you on your guest network. So one of the things we can do is we can have on the access point level, we can have an individual DHCP server set up on a per SSID basis. So that way you can put people on different subnets based on which SSID they've connected to. So that's an extra layer of security in addition to the VLANs. It also provides some additional access there. So if you don't, for some reason, have a fully VLAN aware network, it provides a level of isolation that way by putting them on a different IP subnet. Although technically savvy people will be able to figure out ways around that. It's an extra level there for you. And that is done at the AP level. So it doesn't require a Zycel gateway. So if you have some other vendor's gateway there, this is being hosted on the access point itself. We also have another feature called Layer 2 isolation. And this is something that we recommend you turn on if you are providing guest networks and do not have a VLAN aware network. And so what this does when you enable this is on that SSID will automatically isolate all of the wireless users from each other so they cannot send traffic to each other. And then we will also block all traffic from those wireless users to the wired network. All traffic is blocked. And then you manually go in and we have a whitelist based on layer 2, so based on the MAC address that you want those wireless users to have access to. So on a public hotspot type network, you would generally just put in the MAC address of the WAN to give those users the ability to send traffic to the WAN, but not to send traffic to any other LAN resources. If for some reason you have a network file share or a network printer that you want your guests to have access to, you would simply also add those to your whitelist, and then your wireless users will then have access to those devices. So this is on an outbound basis. So this prevents the wireless users from sending traffic to any MAC address that's not on the list. It does not stop inbound traffic though. So one of the issues we run into is people will connect to the wireless network. They will run a scanner tool, and the scanner tool will be able to detect local area resources. Now, the user will not be able to send traffic to those devices, but they are able to detect them. And the reason for that is because multicast traffic coming from the LAN to the wireless LAN will be passed through. So any device that is sending out multicast packets, wireless users will be able to see those devices and see those packets, but again, they will not be able to directly address or send packets back to them. So the shortcut to automatically enabling layer 2 isolation and intra-BSS blocking when you go into the SSID settings is simply check the enable guest network option there. It's just a little toggle, and that'll automatically turn on layer 2 isolation and intra-BSS blocking for you. So when it comes to troubleshooting your wireless LAN, we've got a couple of tips on how to use the Nebula interface to be able to do that. So one of the most common problems we run into is channel utilization. Basically, if you've got too many access points and too many users using the same channel, it overloads the channel, and that's one of the most common causes of problems we run into. So that is something you can check out here by going to Devices, Access Points, and then select an individual AP. There is an access point usage and connectivity graph that shows up on the screen there, and it will show you over time what the channel utilization has been. So even if the issue isn't happening right now, you will be able to go back and see what was happening earlier in the day. So another issue that's very, very common is when it comes to wireless roaming. So wireless roaming is handled by the client device officially through the Wi-Fi spec. So it's the client device or your phone or your tablet, whatever it happens to be. It's supposed to determine when to switch from one access point to another. It's supposed to be able to keep an eye on nearby access points and go, hey, the access point I'm connected to, the signal's not very good, but I can see another access point on the same network that has a better signal for me. I will automatically switch to that one. And unfortunately, that doesn't always work. In particular, Apple devices historically have been really bad about not wanting to roam from one access point to another. So we do have some settings that can help sort of nudge those client devices along line. So we have the ability to set up what's called assisted roaming in 802.11r. So this enables some Wi-Fi standards that were added back in the 11AC or 11AC Wave 2 days to allow the access point to try to prod those client devices to roam when they should. Doesn't always work. It's not supported by all clients, but it's probably something you should turn on in most multi-AP networks. The other issue we have here is, or another tool we have here is called smart steering. So basically what happens is you set a signal strength that you want the device to maintain at least a minimum signal strength. And if it dips below that, the access point will automatically disconnect them for a short period of time with the hope that it will force them to roam to another nearby access point with better signal strength. So basically, this is the signal strength as detected at the client or at the access point level. So one of the issues and one of the reasons why devices don't roam is your client device may see a very good, strong signal, or at least an okay signal coming from your access point, but your client device probably has a significantly less powerful radio. So while it can see the signal coming from your access point, the signal from the client device is not making it back to the access point. So it'll say, I've got a good connection, I'll stay connected here. It doesn't know that the access point isn't able to detect or is having issues with the signal getting back to it. So by enabling this feature, it sort of allows the access point to go, okay, when this client signal drops below a certain level, I am going to disconnect them. So you can set it up on a 2.4, 5, or 6 gigahertz. Each radio has its own settings that you may want to use. The default settings are probably not the greatest. So it's something that needs to be tweaked in the environment. There is no one setting that's going to work in all situations out there. You will need to tweak it a bit. But our sales engineer, Marcus, has suggested these values as a starting point here. So for 2.4 gigahertz clients, if the signal is worse than negative 69, we should disconnect them. For 5 gigahertz, worse than negative 72. And for 6 gigahertz, worse than negative 75. So we'll move on to some of our switch settings through Nebula here. So one of the cooler features we have here is the ability to automatically assign devices to different VLANs based on the first few digits of their MAC address. So when it comes to MAC addresses, each vendor has a certain mask assigned to them, which covers up, I think it's the first 6 digits of the MAC address that basically are considered a vendor ID. Now, some vendors will have multiple vendor IDs. But generally, you won't see the same vendor ID shared between different hardware vendors. So We have it set up as both a voice VLAN functionality, and then there is also a vendor ID based VLAN. So the most common use for this scenario is voice phones. So what you do is, you've got your voice phones that are from a certain vendor. You select that vendor, and it will automatically put them on your voice VLAN, which has the highest priority over your network. And as you can see here, you simply go into the switch settings, go to voice VLAN, turn that on, and then you've got an OUI drop down here where you can add the OUI digits here from different vendors. And this is done on a drop down basis. So we've got a drop down list of all the most common VoIP hardware manufacturers that they use. So as you can see here, 3Com is quite a few different OUIs that you can select from, and you can put as many as you want in there. You just keep adding the plus button here to add additional OUIs. And then the other way to do it is using the vendor ID here, where this will allow you to automatically or to do it. And instead of the drop down like we do with the voice, you manually type in those first 6 digits of the MAC address that you want to put onto different VLANs. Another common call that our tech support gets has to do with storm control. So storm control basically notifies you when a device is flooding the network with packets. And the feedback from our tech support is the default settings probably a little too sensitive. So we'll get a lot of customers calling in saying, hey, I'm looking at the logs. I keep getting these storm control notifications in my log warning me that this is happening. So that default is 100 packets per second. And that's something that, very busy websites, just going to a very busy website like Facebook initially may be able to generate enough hits to the Facebook server that it can generate that the storm control notification. So we suggest upgrading the digits there. We do suggest leaving storm control enabled, but we do suggest you change the values from the default 100 to 200 or 300. You may need to tweak it a little bit based on what's going on your network before you get notification in your logs that there's too many packets being generated. So another tip I have for you here is recently, earlier this year, we added the what's called an AI chat. I don't know how intelligent the AI chat is, but I have found it's a really good tool to use. So when you're in the Nebula interface, you will see it on the bottom right of whatever screen you are on. Simply open it up, and you can type in questions, and you will get responses from the AI. As I said, I don't think it's particularly intelligent, and for my own use and playing around with it, I find it works best when you just type in certain terms. So for instance, if you're wanting to do static DHCP and you don't remember how to do it, you can simply open up the chat, type in static DHCP, and it will give you a little brief summary, which may or may not be all that useful. But the important thing here is it will include sources. So it will give you links to areas in the manual, to entries on our web forum, to entries in our support database, which can provide you with more detail, including screenshots and things like that. So I've found this to be really helpful when someone has a question about something and I'm not finding it in the interface, or I know where it is in the interface, but I'm not sure what all the options are for it. I find just by typing that into the AI chat and following the links that it provides, that usually provides me the answers that I'm looking for. It's a lot easier to do than manually pulling up the manuals and sifting through them and going over to the support site and trying to find the results that way. And with that, guys, we are done with today's webinar. So if you did have some questions, use that question and answer part of the Zoom interface to send them in. I will answer them for you. I do not have any currently open for me. And then in addition here, my email address is up here on the screen, Shawn R, with Shawn spelled S-H-A-W-N. So Shawn R at Zyxel.com. Feel free to send me any suggestions for topics you'd like to see me add into future versions of this presentation. If you have some other questions that pop up after the webinar ends that you think of, feel free to send them to me. Or of course, you can always reach out. If you're one of our partners, you can reach out to your salesperson, Andy, David, or Jacob, with the question. And if they don't know the answer, they can loop me or Marcus in to provide the answer there for you. So we've got a question from anonymous attendee. For web authentication captive portal, is there a way to link the authentication via Active Directory for login? So no, there is no way to pair it with Active Directory, at least as Active Directory. Most of those authentication features do work with a Radius server. And I believe you can set up Active Directory to also provide Radius authentication, or I know you used to be able to. It's been a while since I've had any experience directly with that. So unless Microsoft is taking that away, that would be how you would do it. So if you want to use your own directory, you need to use Radius slash 8021x to be able to provide that if you don't want to use our cloud hosted authentication database. It does not work directly with Active Directory. So that was the only question that came in. So I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar. Again, feel free to just contact me directly with any additional questions you have or suggestions for other features, topics, configurations in Nebula that you have questions about and you think would be good to add to this presentation. And I will try to add those in for future presentations. Also, this has been recorded and it will show up on our YouTube page. Probably tomorrow, by the end of business day tomorrow, it should be there. The one I did in August is still up there. So you can just go to YouTube, go to Zycel America channel, and you can search Zycel America channel for that presentation. I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully I'll see you at one of our future ones.